explain the lobbying of the same actor that are now trying to convince the institutional to not validate the double materiality in the UN Green Deal, or to not validate or not include the Scope 3 in US regulation. No. I prefer to tell you a story. A story about a mysterious place called Prosperous Land. And this place was already mentioned maybe 30, 40 years ago with a famous editor called All Roads Lead to Rome. And the book was titled Limit to Speed. And of course, in this book, nobody's scared. And they prefer to have a high-speed traveling, high-speed, very short-term pleasure, and with the feeding or dopamine, embedded dopamine or consumerism. But nowadays there is more and more voice calling to find this place. And of course, traditional bus are jumping in this bandwagon to find a new business model. One of his companies is called Profit Express. The driver is a very experimental driver, very proud of his bus. His name is called Mr. ESG. Very proud of his new bus, a high-speed bus, very full of a dashboard indicator, and promoting to find this mysterious place very soon, before dawn. There is other alternative solution, alternative company, promoting more transparency, more intentionality to find the place, and also maybe more humility, because the road is very difficult to find. One of these companies is called Regenerative Caravan. The driver, Mrs. Impact, is very aware of the bumpy road and the very complexity to find an uncertainty. So what guess? The Profit company, the Profit Express, driving at full speed, was of course unable to find a place. Passengers were very disappointed by the advertising, finding this place before dawn. More importantly, they were sick. They were sick to drive with this bumpy road at full speed. So they were trying to complain. And maybe they wanted to sue the company. What's happened? The driver was of course fired, and the bus owner is maybe faced bankruptcy. So what happened to the other company, Regenerative Caravan? They didn't find neither the path. This Prosperous Land, they didn't find it. But with their forward-looking model, integrating the discussion with the passenger, and also talking with the wisdom local actor along the path, they were more convincing to find this path. And more importantly, as a collective action, there were benefits all, and they are convinced to continue the quest, even if the beneficiary will be probably their grandchildren. So what's the epilogue about that? A journey toward the prosperous land is not within reach soon. Or maybe the journey is already part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Yves. And now we move back to the opponents, and I'll turn to Mr. Patrick Schirman, founder and CEO of North Zero.
Can you hear me? Yeah? I'm a bit puzzled now, because I prepared so many arguments to counteract what Yves just said, but the problem is that, or what I was expecting to say, but the thing is that right now I'm just speechless. I didn't get anything of what he said. But this is the problem with Dreamer, you know? They live in La La Land. And if you don't speak the La La Land language, you're lost. And what is ESG? ESG is business, is the world of economy, and it's pragmatic. And this is what I like about ESG. It's not knocking on company's door and saying, oh please, help us save a polar bear. No, ESG is going to the company and say, look, you have a potential problem. You have a problem with non-financial factors. I want you to explain me what they are for you and what you do to mitigate them. And this will have an impact. And with company publishing these assessments and this information, everyone can analyze the ESG profile. You, and you. And you can decide if you want to invest in a company or if you want to buy the product. As a matter of fact, and Philip Morris, why do they still exist? Because you buy cigarettes. Because because politicians don't forbid to sell cigarettes. It's not the financial world to decide what is fair or not. It's you, the consumer, and the politicians. Finance is just the oil between the different wheels. What finance can do is to say, look, you have risk, you have opportunities, let me know how you manage them. And this is what I like about the ESG. It is super pragmatic, and it talks the language of the businesses. And you might like it or not, but the fact is that companies, they have so much leverage, and they will have an impact on the future state of our world. The aim of ESG is not revolution. This is not ESG. ESG is more supporting a needed evolution. And why I think that ESG is successful, why I think that ESG is impactful, I'm just looking at the number. Right now, you have more than 30,000 companies that are publishing ESG data. This is more than 80% of the world market cap. More and more companies are joining the club, and companies are publishing even more data about their operation. So with this all full data, we can learn a lot about the sustainability of the company. Why do they so? Why do they do so? Actually, I don't care. They do so for pleasing their consumer, pleasing their shareholder, or because they have to. What I care is that they report, and that we can track, and we can measure the impact. And this is what matters. But talking about numbers, do you know that, and this is for me another proof that ESG doesn't have any trust issue at all. Do you know that every day, somewhere in the world, being India, China, US, Mexico, there is one government, one regulatory body, one NGO, one industry group that publish law, principle, recommendation based on ESG. So, right now, we have 7,000 laws in the world that mention ESG. Do you really think that all these governments, all these guys, would bet on something that is highly inefficient, doesn't create impact, and things that we cannot trust? No. Let's be serious here. ESG is there to stay. What's going to happen is ESG investing is going to disappear because it's going to be so mainstream that no one will mention it anymore. And for me, the third point that proves that ESG has an impact is actually the fact that we are all here. The fact that we have a debate on ESG, the fact that Juan Carlos, Florence, and I need to defend ESG is actually the ultimate sign that ESG is working, that ESG produces impact. ESG is annoying. ESG is challenging. And when you reach this level of mainstream, obviously, you attract scrutiny. You attract criticism. And people around you are raising the bar of the expectation. And that proves that ESG is actually working. And to conclude, I want to address a criticism around ESG, but is actually highlighting the misinterpretation and the total lack of knowledge that people have about ESG. You have in such a country some right-wing politicians that are blaming ESG for having a political agenda. But what these people don't understand is that ESG doesn't have an agenda, doesn't have a political agenda. ESG has multiple and contradictory agenda. And so my message for Governor DeSantis, for example, is to invest in an ETF that, I quote, hold itself how to be sustainable or ESG-focused investment. In other words, ESG concerns are central to the investment process of this strategy. What does this ETF do? It invests only in biblically aligned companies. So my conclusion about ESG is ESG and ESG impact investing is only as good as what you do with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. And now we go back to the proposition, team 1, which are being represented by Nadia Balgobi. The floor is yours, Nadia.
Good evening, everyone. Well, I would say that ESG is a framework, like many frameworks that have been proposed over 60 years to solve the problem of the world. And the state of the world is so bad that today we cannot allow ourselves to even say it works or it doesn't work. We have an emergency, all right? So the question is, how come that we have such a good framework and that we are still seeing a bit of what we call a scope deficit in terms that it addresses a very narrow, probably actors in the market, while we know that 90% of the market is done by very small, non-formal, and MSMEs, or whatever you call them. They are the market. But these people does not benefit from any of those frameworks, any of those support, because in the end, it's them who can change the world, it's them who can probably solve the problems on the ground and of the reality. So if we were to see whether ESG is helping SDGs, I'm still questioning. My experience in the field of ethics, of business excellence, forces me to question on whether we can conciliate two mottos, which are people, planet, profit, which I guess is a bit what also ESG supports, right? And versus the SDGs, which is people, planet, and prosperity. I'm still questioning, is this conciliable or not? Some of other questions that I'm asking myself is, how much voluntary is there in the ESG agenda in addressing really the problem of the world and the laws? And I'm happy that ESG has inspired mandatory laws to come up and so on and so forth. But do we need ESGs really for this to happen? I think we had the MDGs before, and we have not done much. And the SDGs came along. And since 1992, we had the Rio Summit. And for more than 50 years now, we are still asking ourselves whether we are consuming and producing and who is doing good and bad. This is not serious. The challenge is at another level. Who has the capacity today to really put the money in the countries and understand their concerns and not come with a proposition of investment that may not be of interest to nobody? So let's be realistic and understand that there is a kind of approach of going about business. We have to support business, but we have to support the small business. And I've not seen much, and I can tell you for a small business to pay for a training, he can't even afford it. So how can we solve the problem of the world if 5,000 big corporations hold the biggest capital in the world have not been able to adhere to the convention of the OECD on multinational transactions in addressing corruption? Do you think we can trust a framework like ESG? We know that ethics is now more and more referred as cosmetics. So which means I'm not questioning the framework, what's in it. My question is, what do we do with this framework? Who can benefit from it? Whether can there be a wider audience who can benefit from it? That's all the questions I have to you, the opponents. How much those big corporations who support the supply chain are really changing their own environment? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia. And now I turn to Madame Florence Anglès, who has 7 minutes to present her argument.
Yes, good evening, everyone. So it's a pleasure to talk today about ESG, and can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. So it's a pleasure to talk to you tonight, and I want to drive with me and to explain why I believe in ESG. And I'm not alone, and I will explain you why. So before we talk about ESG as a framework, yes, of course, it's a risk management framework, and impact investing is a strategy to drive positive outcome. But if you look at impact investing funds, you can see that impact investing funds are all ESG compliant, whereas ESG funds are not impact investing funds. That will bring you the picture. And when you look at ESG, there is one main risk that is shared by all regulators. You know what is this kind of risk? It's greenwashing. And you know, greenwashing is not only applicable to ESG, but also to impact investing. Because it was one of the main facts highlighted by the European regulator, ESMA, that has mentioned that one of the key issues in greenwashing is impact washing. So meaning that it's a misuse of SDGs, you know, the sustainable goals. And you know why? Because I've done a study, and it's one of the report of the ESMA dated from February 2024, this year, where they mentioned they have analyzed 187 funds, meaning SDG funds, and they analyze it, and they see that they do not share or do not have a layer above what is non-SDG funds. Meaning so that the risk is shared not only for ESG funds, but also for impact investing funds. So, where the important fact is to mention sometimes regulation may be a burden, but regulation was at the root of the growth of ESG, you know, because the epicenter of regulation is Europe, and you know, thanks to the EU Action Plan, we have seen this growth in ESG, because it's not only risk management, it's not only a regulation, but it's also a way to grab and to be sure that all the capital flows will go into the right direction. And when we talk about ESG, we need to understand what is materiality. And materiality assessment is one aspect in order to avoid greenwashing. And of course, the root of materiality is the accounting principle. You know, it's dated from the US Securities Act, dated from 1933, and the materiality was at the beginning focused on business approach, and it was one of the main drawbacks to ESG, because it was always mentioned that ESG is only single materiality focused, and it's no longer the case. I will explain you, because if you look at the EU regulation and also from the point of view of the US, you've got the aspect of double materiality. And double materiality will be the main aspect that will change everything, because you need to look at not only financial impact, which is the single impact that we can see from ESG, but also the impact where you take only what we can say it's inside out, which is the impact motivation, and the outside in. Outside in is what we have seen, it's the financial impact, but now what we need to see is what we see the impact. And the impact is also something that we should take care in ESG as well. And the main route was also the aspect of CSDR, which is the reporting under the EU that is applicable to EU companies and not only EU companies, where you need to apply double materiality. And if you align this aspect of double materiality in ESG, you need to consider not only what is good for your company, but also what is good for the planet, for the people. And it's a way to align what we see and what we are all looking at. It's financial return, but at the same time, the aspect as the way to create a stringent and resilient future. That's why I tell you my story. I believe in ESG. It's like, it was a beginning, it's growing, and now it's improving to grow further in order not only to improve the performance from the financial side, but also to support the sustainability goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. We did try to mobilize, as you can see, as Carlos said in his opening remarks, each team were granted 4 spots, and we did, through our partnership with the Geneva Impact Investing Association at the Graduate Institute, try to mobilize the voice of the youth to represent your defense of the motion, or your opposition to the motion. But we do have a representative of youth. So the last speaker is Mr. Mohit. He's a second-year student at the Graduate Institute, and it will be a great pleasure to give him the word. What is yours?
A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the organizers for inviting me to speak with you all today. It's an honor to share the stage with such an excellent group of people here, and also to address such an outstanding and very wise audience. Back in 1970s, an oil company, ExxonMobil, did a very fantastic research where they came out with a very accurate forecast that a rise in greenhouse gas emissions would lead to a very rapid global warming. They knew it back then and still continued to produce fossil fuels. Today, we are in a state of global warming, a climate emergency which is threatening all of humanity. The last 9 months were the warmest on record. So may I ask, why ExxonMobil has a BBB ESG rating on the MSCI index? Why is this company even listed on their index? So clearly, there is no environment or E in ESG. Now let's talk about Apple. Very recently, the European Commission has put a fine of 1.8 billion euros on Apple for abusive App Store rules for music streaming providers. Last year, the National Labor Relations Board of the US government found that Apple is maintaining workplace policies which unlawfully, I repeat, unlawfully discourage its employees from discussing workplace conditions. in 2020, Apple agreed to pay $500 million as compensation on a US lawsuit which accused Apple of deliberately slowing down older iPhones. And a similar case is going on in the UK, where the compensation being sought is around 1.6 billion pounds. So despite all this, why does Refinitiv give Apple an excellent ESG score? An 80 on 100? So clearly there is no social and no governance here in ESG. Everything, the methodology, the quality of data, and the sources of data, which make up these very polished ESG ratings, are questionable to the core. And yet, these ESG rating companies are not accountable to anyone, whether they misrepresent a company or whether they arbitrarily on their own discretion change their rating methodology someday. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation we are now in is very similar to the 2008 financial crisis. At that time, credit rating agencies had tried to cover up grim realities of the market till the point the world went into a global financial crisis. It was credit rating agencies then and ESG rating agencies now. So yes, ESG has a trust deficit, and we need more accountability mechanisms, standardization, common rating frameworks, and better regulations to bring back trustworthiness into this ESG system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohit. So now we have 10 minutes whereby the audience that showed up today, I'm very pleased to see you today. We had more than 147 who expressed an interest in showing up on LinkedIn. So we're very happy that amongst those 147 that you actually made it to the Salle Communale in Coppet. So please introduce yourself very briefly, your name and your affiliation, and then keep the question or the speech as short as possible. Emma, do you mind taking the phone? Microphone too? If anyone has a question, there's only two.
To be the first one, ik had Geneva Microlabs and I had actually more like a comment. It sounded to me like what you really want to stress is that there is an arbitrage, a trade-off between the S and the E. Because what you mentioned it yourself about Exxon, we actually knew since 1900 that putting out CO2 emissions into the atmosphere would increase the temperature. But so what we actually did is we improved our S at the expense of E. I mean, I disagree completely with what was said before. I think the world has never been in a better shape, socially talking, than before, and India is actually a great example for that. So for me, the question is, now that we have improved our S, how do we shift towards the E? And maybe also the G was mentioned, the governance framework we need to move. The point is that we actually have a great accounting framework, but we need to shift our incentives within the accounting framework. Because it's not the accounting framework that needs to change, but it's the incentives that we provide through this framework. Thank you.
Good evening. I've also just a comment. I think the problem with ESG is that we think that it's only the big company the big financial